You are across the room. Maybe you are making coffee. Maybe you are sitting on the couch with your phone. Maybe you are just walking past the tank the way you walk past it 100 times a day without really looking. And then something catches your eye. A movement inside the enclosure. Slow, deliberate, circular. One front arm raised and rotating in a wide arc, like a tiny figure trying to get the attention of someone far away. You stop. You watch. The arm goes up, traces its circle, and comes back down. Sometimes it happens once, sometimes 3 or 4 times in a row. The dragon's body stays completely still through the whole thing, head level, eyes forward, everything else motionless, while that one arm moves with a patience and a purpose that feels almost choreographed. And you think, is it waving at me? The answer is yes and no, and the full answer is one of the most interesting things you will learn about the animal living in your house. Because that arm wave is not random, it is not a nervous tick. It is not your dragon being cute or quirky or doing something that has no meaning. It is a piece of communication that was already ancient when the first humans appeared on Earth, a signal with specific content directed at a specific receiver, running on behavioral software that evolution has been refining for hundreds of millions of years. What your dragon is saying when it waves depends entirely on context, and most owners only know one of the 3 or 4 things it can mean. The ones they do not know include a signal that tells you something is wrong with the social environment inside that enclosure. A signal that tells you something is wrong with what the dragon sees when it looks at you. And a signal that, if you understand it correctly, gives you a direct window into how your animal perceives its own position in its world. Welcome to Reptile Realities. Subscribe before you keep going, because this channel goes past the surface of the behavior into the biology that drives it, and the last thing we cover today is a waving behavior that owners almost universally misread, one that looks completely harmless and is frequently a sign of chronic psychological stress that builds quietly over months. Stay through the whole thing. Tonight we are going into what the arm wave actually is, where it comes from, what the different versions of it mean, how to read the context that tells them apart, and what to do when the wave is telling you something you need to act on. Number 1, what the arm wave actually is and how old it really is. The bearded dragon arm wave belongs to a category of animal communication called ritualized signaling. Ritualized signals are behaviors that evolved from functional movements, things animals did for practical reasons, and were gradually shaped by natural selection into formalized displays with specific social meaning. The display becomes stereotyped, meaning it looks roughly the same every time it is performed, and it becomes recognizable to the animals receiving it, meaning the receiver responds to it in consistent, predictable ways. The arm wave in agamid lizards, the family to which bearded dragons belong, is one of the most studied ritualized signals in reptile behavioral research. It appears across multiple species in the family. It is performed in recognizable form by animals that have had no contact with each other and no opportunity to learn the behavior socially. It is innate. It is in the genome. Your dragon did not learn to wave by watching other dragons. It was born knowing how to do it, and born knowing, at some level, what it means when another animal does it. This puts the arm wave in a different category than the behaviors we tend to attribute to personality or individual character. It is not your dragon's quirk. It is your dragon's language, or more precisely, one word in a language that was old before Australia existed in its current form. Spoken by animals on a continent your dragon's ancestors reached long before any human being did. Understanding it as language changes how you look at it. A word has meaning. A word has a receiver. A word is chosen, even when the choice is instinctive, because something in the environment has triggered the need to communicate something specific. When your dragon waves, it is not performing for your entertainment. It is responding to something it has perceived and categorizing that something in a way that requires a social signal in return. Number 2, submission and what it tells you about your dragon's inner world. The most commonly known interpretation of the arm wave is submission, and it is correct as far as it goes, but most owners stop there without understanding what submission actually means in the context of a bearded dragon's social life and what it tells you about the animal's state. In the wild, bearded dragons are not highly social animals. They do not form groups or packs or colonies. They live in overlapping territories and interact primarily around resources and reproduction. Within those interactions, a dominance hierarchy operates, not a rigid or permanent one, but a real one, where animals assess each other and signal their relative position. The arm wave is the submission signal. It says, "In the behavioral vocabulary of the species, I see you. I recognize that you are larger or more dominant than I am in this moment. I am not challenging you. I am not threatening you. Please do not respond to me as a threat." The key word in that translation is perceives. The dragon waves at whatever it perceives as dominant. And this is where it gets interesting for owners, because what a bearded dragon perceives as dominant in a captive environment is not always what we expect. Your dragon waves at you sometimes. That is the moment that feels like communication, like recognition, like a small animal acknowledging the person who feeds and cares for it. And it is communication. But the content of that communication is not affection. It is a social positioning signal from a prey animal to something it registers as large and dominant and present. You are not being greeted. You are being assessed and deferred to, which is a meaningful thing, but a different meaningful thing than most owners believe when they wave back. Your dragon also waves at its own reflection, at other dragons visible through the glass of a neighboring enclosure, at a stuffed animal on a shelf across the room that is roughly the right size and shape to register as another animal, at a poster on the wall, at a television screen showing movement. The submission signal is triggered by the perception of a dominant presence, and a bearded dragon's threat detection system is sensitive enough and human environment calibrated enough to fire on a surprising range of stimuli. Knowing this matters because it tells you something about your animal's experience of its enclosure. A dragon that is waving constantly, multiple times a day, at its reflection or at objects in the room, is a dragon that is perceiving its environment as full of dominant animals requiring constant social management. That is not a comfortable state to be in. Number 3, the female wave and what reproduction has to do with the animal in your living room. There is a version of the arm wave that has nothing to do with submission, and that owners of female dragons sometimes see without understanding what is driving it. Female bearded dragons wave as part of reproductive signaling. In the presence of a male, or in the presence of something the female reads as potentially male, a female will wave to signal receptivity and non-aggression. The wave in this context is not submission to a dominant animal. It is a social opener, a signal that says, "I am not a threat, and I am open to interaction." It is part of the behavioral sequence that in the wild would precede mating. Female dragons in captivity will display this wave seasonally, even without any male present. The hormonal cycles that drive reproductive behavior run largely on the light and temperature cues of the environment. And a female whose enclosure is cycling through appropriate seasonal changes will move through her reproductive hormonal cycle, whether a male exists in her world or not. The wave appears as part of that cycle, directed at whatever the animal's social perception system has identified as the most relevant social target in its environment. Sometimes that is you. Sometimes that is the reflection. Sometimes it appears to be directed at nothing at all, which is the animal responding to internal hormonal state rather than any specific external trigger. If you have a female dragon and you are seeing increased arm waving at certain times of year, alongside other behavioral changes, increased restlessness, digging behavior, reduced appetite, what you are observing is a hormonally driven seasonal cycle expressing itself through the behavioral vocabulary the animal has available. The wave is one word of a longer sentence the dragon's body is writing about where it is in its reproductive calendar. Number 4, the wave that looks like submission and is actually something else entirely. This is the context that most owners miss, and it is the one that matters most from a welfare standpoint. There is a specific arm waving pattern that occurs in dragons that are housed together or that can see each other through glass, and it looks on the surface like the ordinary submission wave. The movement is the same. The posture is the same, but the context and the meaning and the consequence are different. When two bearded dragons are cohabiting an enclosure, or when one dragon can see another through a transparent barrier, a dominance dynamic establishes itself quickly. One animal becomes the dominant. One becomes the subordinate. The subordinate waves. Frequently, sometimes almost continuously in the presence of the dominant animal. And the owners see this and interpret it as the two animals communicating peacefully, working out their social relationship the way the species is supposed to, doing fine together. What is actually happening is that the subordinate animal is in a state of chronic social stress. The wave is not a peaceful resolution. It is a repeated, ongoing attempt to manage a threat that never goes away because the dominant animal never goes away. Every time the subordinate waves, it is because it has assessed the dominant and concluded it needs to signal again. The dominant is still there. The threat perception is still active. The submission signal has to be renewed because the situation requiring submission has not resolved. Dragons house together, even when they appear to be getting along, even when there is no visible aggression, show measurable physiological stress responses in the subordinate animal. Suppressed appetite, even when food is available. Reduced basking, because the subordinate defers to the dominant at the prime basking spots. Immune suppression from chronic cortisol elevation. Weight loss over time. These animals are often described by their owners as shy, or as less food motivated than the other one, or as just having a different personality. The wave is the signal that should have told the owner, from the beginning, that the arrangement was not working. Bearded dragons should not be housed together. Full stop. The arm wave, in a cohabitation context, is the subordinate animal spending its days in a state of managed fear, performing a submission ritual over and over because the source of the perceived threat has been placed permanently in its living space with no possibility of escape. The wave looks harmless. The experience behind it is not. Number 5. What the wave is telling you about how your dragon sees you and what to do with that. We come back, at the end, to the moment at the beginning, you across the room, the movement in the tank, the slow, deliberate arc of a front arm going up and coming around and settling back down. Your dragon sees you. It has assessed you. It has categorized you as a dominant presence, a large animal in its environment that requires acknowledgement. And it has responded with the signal its species evolved for exactly this situation. It has waved. This is not nothing. The dragon that sees a dominant presence and waves has made a social calculation. It has decided that the appropriate response to your presence is deference rather than flight or threat display. That is a form of recognition. It is not affection in the mammalian sense. It does not involve the neurochemistry of bonding or the emotional architecture of attachment. But it is the animal's social system engaging with you as a known entity, a specific presence in its world that it has developed a consistent response to. Over time, with consistent and gentle handling, with correct husbandry that keeps the animal's stress baseline low, with an enclosure that does not contain or face another dragon triggering constant submission cycling, the arm wave directed at you tends to decrease. Not because the dragon stops noticing you, because the animal's threat response threshold has been adjusted by experience. You are familiar, you are not surprising. The need to signal submission every time you cross the room fades as the association between your presence and genuine threat continues to fail to materialize. That shift, from frequent waving to infrequent waving, to an animal that watches you move through the room with alert, calm attention rather than reflexive submission signaling, is one of the most meaningful progressions in the relationship between a keeper and a dragon. You will not feel it as dramatically as you feel the wave. It is quieter than that, but it represents something real. An animal whose nervous system has learned, through accumulated experience, that the large presence on the other side of the glass is not a predator that needs constant managing. The wave was never really about you. It was always about the dragon's ancient social software running its protocols on whatever environment it found itself in. But the arc from frequent waves to calm watchfulness, that is something you build. That is the relationship, in the only language the animal has for it. Now you know what it is saying. Pay attention to how often it says it, and to what. The frequency and the target tell you more about your dragon's experience of its world than almost any other behavior you will observe. Tell me in the comments what your dragon waves at most often. You? The reflection? Something across the room? Another dragon? Tell me the setup, and I will tell you what I think the animal is actually communicating. I read every one. See you in the next video.